Now, today, the pollen count is high in many places across the UK, and we head into allergy season. Expert Professor Adam Fox is here to help us out. Adam, this is a big problem. Around 16 million people in the UK suffer from hay fever, but what actually is it?
So hay fever is an allergy to pollen, and at this time of year, first the trees, then grass and then weeds start releasing their pollen into the atmosphere, and if those tiny little grains get up your nose and you're allergic to it, then it sets off an allergic reaction, and that means your body releases histamine, and that will cause all the symptoms that hay fever sufferers are very familiar with. Itchiness, blocked nose, itchy eyes, runny nose and sneezing. For most people it's irritating, but for some people it's really debilitating. It has a massive impact on their quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough few months ahead for those who really struggle. There's different types of pollen, aren't there? Should we talk through them? Where would you like to start?
Sure. So the first one that comes out is typically the tree pollen. And that usually starts sometime around late January, February time, and it will peak in around March and April, and then as it settles down, the grass pollen's starting to kick in now, and that will peak in May, June, and then maybe another peak in July. And then from June onwards also up until September, you can get weed pollen. So different people will be allergic to different pollens, sometimes more than one, and depending on how much of that pollen is around, that's how much symptoms they'll suffer from. Does
it affect people in the same? Is it the symptoms the same for all of them?
So the symptoms are broadly the same sort of things, but how bad your symptoms will be will depend on loads of different things. So how allergic you are and your general state of health. So if you're under the weather, you'll probably be a little bit worse. But also things like how high the pollen count is, and also what the weather is local to where you are. So if it's a nice day with a gentle breeze, then it's going to have more of an impact. Whereas if it's raining, the rain will catch the pollen grains and bring them back down to the ground, so that's better. Hay fever sufferers will often say they're much better by the seaside. That's because it's a bit windier, better ventilated, so the pollen's more dispersed, it's less trouble there.
Quite high at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, so you'll find in different places that there'll be different amounts of different pollens, so people will suffer differently.
OK. We've actually seen in Sir David Attenborough's Wild Isle series how the tree pollen clouds are. We can see it there. It's so visual, isn't it, when you see it like that? So if that's affecting you, how can you ease the symptoms?
Well, it's worth mentioning that people worry about what's happening at the bottom of their garden, when actually, if you imagine huge birch forests in Scandinavia releasing enormous amounts of pollen that can then float over, you can see how people run into real trouble. But there's a range of things you can do. So simple things like pollen balms, for example, so rubbing a little bit of petroleum jelly just on the outside of your nose to try and trap the pollen.
So it's actually stopping it going further in the airways?
Yeah, because better that pollen grain gets stuck on the outside than actually getting inside. Saltwater nasal sprays will be really helpful at rinsing things out. And then things like when you've been out all day, coming home, washing your hair, washing your clothes so that you get the pollen off them so that they don't get...
So even if you can't see it?
Yeah, even if you can't see it. And if it's in your hair, you'll rub it in your pillow and then rub your nose in it while you're asleep overnight. So trying not to dry your clothes outside when the pollen count is high, because again, that'll collect pollen grains on there. But if you've got proper symptoms, really there's no substitute for going to your pharmacist and asking about antihistamines. And make sure you get the right sort, because the long-acting, non-sleepy ones will be much more effective than the short-acting, sleepier, old-fashioned ones, which aren't as good. But if that's not doing the job, if you're an adult, you can get a steroid nasal spray. They're very safe and they're very effective. You can get that over the counter. If it's a child, then you may need to visit your GP to get that.
Yeah, because like you say, if people are struggling, they really suffer from it. What about those people? What's your advice for those who it's really debilitating?
So it's a real thing, and we're coming into exam season as well. So for people who have got bad hay fever and are doing GCSEs and A-levels, we actually know from studies that it will affect their exam performance.
Wow.
So if a combination of the right sort of antihistamines and nasal sprays aren't doing the job, speak to your doctor, because there are treatments such as desensitization, something we call sublingual immunotherapy, fully licensed in the UK, available on the NHS. You'll probably have to push to get an appointment with a specialist allergist in order to get access to it, but it can be a very effective treatment.
Because your asthma gets worse.
It does, yeah, closely linked. But that's some great advice there, Adam. Thank you so much, yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Now, the buzz for the Euro